Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Behind me is a '05 Honda Accord. You guys have seen this in a few previous videos that we've done. However, today we're going to be replacing the lower ball joint on it. Now, before we go ahead and do this, guys, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. It'll definitely help the channel grow. And with that said, let's go ahead and start on replacing the ball joint. So before we go ahead and begin, guys, one thing to note is that you got to somehow support the car with a jack and jack stands or a lift, depending on how you're going to be working on it. And then the first stage, after you get the car up in the air, you're going to want to remove the front tire. Now, I've already removed mine because I had to look at a few things here. So first thing that we're going to want to do, guys, to be able to replace our lower ball joint is we're going to go ahead and remove our cotter pin from our upper control arm. You just bend the tabs back and pull it out, and you should be able to get it out, and we'll just be replacing it with a new one later. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and unbolt our upper control arm. Now you want to be careful because sometimes it does have a little bit of spring in it, and we just replaced this arm not too long ago, so we're going to go ahead and let it go up there and keep the tension off of it. And then what I like to do, just because I don't want to damage any threads in this process, we're going to go ahead and put the nut back on just to keep the threads from damaging any way, shape, or form when the process, because there will be a lot of stuff moving back and forth here, guys. Now the next stage in this is going to be, and let me see if I can kind of get you guys in close here without being in my way. But you're going to want to remove this 10mm bolt that holds up the bracket for the ABS wire on the actual upper control arm. Then you have one more bolt that holds the rest of the wire onto the knuckle assembly, and we're going to go ahead and push that to the side. Now on the other side here, we're also going to have two 10mm bolts that hold the brake line into place. We're going to go ahead and remove those. Now these are just bracket bolts, guys. You're just kind of getting the brackets out of your way because we are removing the knuckle to be able to make way for the ball joint. We're going to be doing it on the bench. So you do got to give yourself pretty much a lot of access and a lot of room. So it's easier to unbolt the small stuff now in the beginning than towards the end. So let me go get a couple more tools here. And the next step is going to be to remove the tie rod end and the lower ball joint nut and everything, along with the axle. Next step that I like to do is go ahead and remove your axle nut. Now we just did the axle on this car not too long ago, so this axle should slide in and out of its place fairly easy. And what I like to do afterwards is just kind of push it in just to make sure she is going to be nice and free. Once we have that achieved, we're going to go ahead and spin the tire around to get access to our tie rod. So we're going to want to crank it all the way to the passenger side, and that'll give us enough room to be able to get to our tie rod, which is going to be right down here. Now to get the tie rod off, there is going to be a cotter pin, guys, and this is a fresh cotter pin that I just put on there. This car was in here for an axle. I don't know if you guys have seen the video, but the axle was pretty much snapped in half. So what I did was upsold this job. When I was doing the axle, I found that the upper and lower ball joints needed replacing, and the customer gave me the okay. The car never left, so I just put some regular fitting cotter pins in there just to be able to pull it in and out of the shop while I was waiting for the ball joints and everything to come in. So now that we got our cotter pin off that we just put on there to hold it together, we're going to take our 17mm and go ahead and take off the nut that is holding the tie rod end on. Now you're going to take a hammer and you got to tap the tie rod. What it goes through is right here, guys, and that should separate it. Now this was a part about 4 days ago, something like that. It comes off very easily. It almost looks effortless in this video, but do keep in mind that sometimes those will fight you, especially if they've been on there for years. So just keep that as a general reminder. Now the next thing that we're gonna have to do is spin the wheel back the other way, and I'm grabbing the tire from the passenger side when I'm doing my spinning here, guys, just because it's a lot easier. And what we're going to have to do here now is go ahead and completely remove our brake caliper as an assembly from our knuckle. And the way that I do that is basically spin it around and kind of tilt it backwards. And we're going to go ahead and remove the two 17mm bolts that are located right back here. Now I'm going to move the camera to show you guys what I'm referring to. You've seen this before, but we're gonna basically be removing this right here, and there's another one right down there that we have to remove. Now I can't get the camera in there, so I'm just gonna show you guys what it looks like from removing it on this side right here. And what I'm gonna do is go ahead and position everything out of the way so I can get my tool back here. And I'm gonna go ahead and remove our caliper as an assembly. Now that we unbolted it, it should be fairly loose in there. And all you really have to do is slide it out. But before I do, I grab one of my hooks because we will be hanging this out of our way. And we just simply pull it off. We're gonna use this bracket right here for the line to hold it into place. Should do fairly good. And now you guys will see all we have in here is basically the axle, and then we have to go ahead and loosen up our lower ball joint. Now I've gotten ahead and I lifted the car, guys, and the only thing holding this knuckle assembly in is our lower ball joint. And I don't know how well the camera's gonna pick this up, but it's right here. This is right by the brake shield. Now this does have a cotter pin that goes through it, so what I'm gonna do is come here on the back side, and since we're not gonna be reusing this ball joint, I don't really care if the cotter pin comes off. What I am looking to do is just separate the tabs so I can get my socket in here so we can go ahead and break it off. Now if I was going to reuse the ball joint and I had to remove my knuckle assembly for some reason, guys, you're not going to want to go ahead and just, you know, zip it off and break it. But 9 times out of 10 I do find that you do have to go this route unless the ball joint is fairly new when you're servicing something. Typically it does fight you. Now I'm going to take my 17mm socket. I'm going to use a hammer to wedge it into place. Now the main reason why is because we didn't remove our cotter pin, so most of it is still in there, and we just got to make room for it. So I'm going to go ahead and get this wedged in there, and I'll be right back with you guys. So I went ahead and I got my socket on there. Now it does fight you simply because that cotter pin does have raised edges, so it makes it a little bit difficult for the socket to go on, guys. But I just use a hammer to tap it on, and we're gonna go ahead and remove it. And it's just as easy as that. The cotter pin that's stuck in there does break, but again, I would only do this if you're planning on not reusing it. If the cotter pin does break on here and you're able to get a nut off, you can come in here and drill the hole out to be able to reuse another cotter pin. In this scenario, it simply doesn't matter because we're just going to be replacing the ball joint. We're going to get a new cotter pin, and the hole's already fresh and drilled out on the new one that we're going to be sliding it through. Now, the next step in this is going to be getting our ball joint separated from our lower control arm. There's many methods to do this, guys. I prefer the old school hammer and hitting what it goes through trick, where you basically want to hit the ball joint through what it goes. After a couple hits, you should see it pop out of its socket and be ready for removal. However, when that happens, you're not going to remove the knuckle yet because we still have to disconnect our ABS wire. But for right now, I'm just trying to get this joint to pop off. And I do have to stand where the camera is, so I'm not going to be able to show this to you guys, plus it's going to be very loud. I don't want to cause you know, your guys' eardrums to bleed here with all the impacting noise I'm going to do by hitting it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera and come back once it's all set. So I went ahead and gave it a few taps with my hammer. It took quite a few, to be honest, because this has been on there for a while. And then what I did was I just lift up on my assembly, and you can see that the joint is releasing from the lower control arm. Now everything that should be separated and bolted on is pretty much taken off. Nothing is keeping us back except for the axle that is still held in here, but that comes out very easily. And then the last thing is the ABS speed sensor wire. Now in order to remove that, I'm going to lower the car and show you guys the connector under the hood we have to disconnect. So we went ahead and we lowered the car, guys, and we have to disconnect our connector for our ABS harness for the speed sensor. Now it's going to be located right here in this corner, and I just want to give you guys a general overview. I'm going to basically tilt you in here. Now if you guys can see this orange connector that is located right here, you're gonna have to push that tab and pull off on it, and there's gonna be 2 little plastic wire holders that should hold it into place. Now the camera obviously will not be going in here. There's no way for me to capture this on film, but I just wanted to show you guys the location of it. so you guys do know what I'm talking about and where it is for the disconnection. Now that you know where that orange connector is located, guys, you will see that it's just basically kind of in this area, but inside under the hood. Now, this is the other end of that connector that feeds into the wire that's more stout for the ABS speed sensor. And what you're going to notice is that you have one little notch here and a notch up there. Let me zoom the camera in here and you guys will kind of see it better. What you're going to want to do is get in that notch with like a pocket screwdriver and gently lift up on the tab and then kind of yank out on it, and then do the same thing from the top and you should be able to pull it out. Let me show you guys here, and I don't know how well this is going to get covered, but I'm going to go ahead and push up on the bottom one, and that one is pushed up. And now I'm going to do the same thing on this top one. Top one is proving a little difficult because it's hard to see it in here. But let me see if I can, there you go, get it unwedged and get that one, and you can see it comes off. Now the connector, if you disconnected it, should come off with it. And just show you guys in a little bit of a clearer picture, what you're trying to do here is get in here and pull down on these. You can see how the clip kind of has a little lip right there that holds onto the body. You're going to want to be doing that for both top and bottom. Now that your ABS wire is separated, your lower ball joint is unbolted, and everything is free, all you really have to do is come up here, pull up on your axle, on your knuckle, I'm sorry, and then release the axle just by pulling it out, and go ahead and take your knuckle assembly to the bench. Now that we have our knuckle on the bench, guys, this is the ball joint that we're going to be replacing. Where I like to begin is I take a razor blade and I like to cut off the boot, or at least a portion of the boot, just to gain access to the innards of it. There's several methods to getting the lower ball joint off once it's separated. However, what I always like to do, and a lot of people may say, oh, it's wrong, you're hurting it, but in reality, the old ball joint is going to be trash, so I really don't need to save it. Just to kind of show you guys, I'm opening up the boot, and you can see that's all grease that's been dried up. So these ball joints were in immediate attention. Now, a lot of people will use a press to push out the ball joint and get it out, and that's fine. However, what I like to do is I take a hammer and I try to hit directly on the stud here to see if I can get it worked out. And this can be a little difficult, but as you can see, hitting it kind of separates it a little bit. And if I notice that it can separate that easy, what I like to do is take my air hammer and go ahead and push it out. Now what I'm going to do, guys, is do a time lapse of this so you guys can see, but just to kind of reiterate is I'm going to take my air hammer, put it underneath the boot where it's metal, and just basically push up and try to get my ball joint out of there. So you guys saw in the time lapse right there, I was able to get my ball joint off. And this is just my method, guys. A lot of you might say, well, Mike, I don't have an air hammer. And that's understandable. The other way that you can do it is by taking a bigger hammer and just kind of hitting it on this end if it will release. Or, like I said, guys, you guys can rent the ball joint press tool from AutoZone or, you know, whatever part store is near you guys. And you should be able to do it that way. Another trick would be to go ahead and remove the dust boot off of this and find a compatible socket, and you can line it up, and then what you can do is tap the socket to go ahead and push it out, you know, and out of the hole here. This is just my method, guys. It's always worked for me. I've always been in a shop, so I have an air hammer and compressed air. I have done this on the side of the road a few times, you know, when I was driving my old school Hondas back in the day, and I would just do it on the street with a hammer and a socket, just kind of, you know, beat it up and get it out of there. It's not that difficult. Now, believe it or not, you can actually use a hammer to press it back in. However, I'm not going to show you guys that method. I will show you how to use the press to press the new ball joint back into its place. But what we're going to do now is just a little bit of prep work. We're going to take a little bit of silicone spray, and I like to douse the inside, and I'm just going to go ahead and wipe it off, get off any contaminants, and I'm going to get our new ball joint and show you guys how to press that in. So I went ahead and I cleaned up my race where my ball joint goes. I don't grind or do anything on there, guys. Just clean it up with a little bit of brake cleaner or silicone spray. Now what I'm going to do is take my new ball joint here, and I'm going to go ahead and take off the castle nut, and I'm going to spray it down with some silicone spray, mainly because I'm going to press it in with the boot. I don't want the boot to tear. So we're going to go ahead and lubricate that. And we are going to go ahead and hit the hole in there as well. And we're just going to gently push it through. And what I like to do is use a little hammer just to help center it, just like that. And she is nice and centered. Now, a lot of you may have seen this before. A lot of you may not have seen this. It's a C-clamp. It's for pressing ball joints in and out. You could use this to press bushings, whatever it is that you prefer. However, in this case, we're going to be using it on the ball joint. Now, there's a lot of different presses, guys, and a lot of different ways you can use them. Once you have your ball joint set in there, you're going to find an accommodating cup that is a little bit bigger than the ball joint, but won't go on your knuckle, meaning it's not too big. You're going to line it up just like that. Now, what I also do is go ahead and take my C-clamp here, which is what we're going to be using to press with, and I try to get this lined up. Now, this can sometimes be a little bit difficult here, guys, just trying to get the right mix to work. So you may find yourself having a little bit of a hard time. I basically pull out my C-clamp, screw all the way, just so I can get it mocked up on here. And the biggest thing that I'll say when you're doing this, guys, or using a ball joint press, is take your time, don't rush it, make sure things are lined up, because if not, you can cause some serious damage. Now I'm going to be using my 22 handgun to go ahead and get it in there. A lot of you may say, hey, that's not the correct way to do it, but you know, that's how it's done. Now I'm going to try to position you guys in an angle where you can see, and what you're basically going to be seeing here is this ball joint is going to be sucked in there. Now my C-clamp is kind of in the way, but that's how the setup likes to stay, guys. Let me see if I can just position it, and hopefully you guys can see this a lot easier. Now, I do believe it's pressed in all the way. I'm going to check my clearance there and just give it one more hit. And then we're going to go ahead and back it off and remove our C-clamp and our cup adapter. And now you guys will clearly see our ball joint is pressed in and ready to go. Once you achieve this, you're going to go ahead and take this back to the car. Now, I will make one note of this that I completely overlooked, guys, and I do want to mention it. A lot of these Honda Accords or Civics will have normally like a stainless steel ring around here. Unfortunately, this car does not have it. But I did want to mention that if you have that ring, one, it's impossible not to damage them when you get them off if they're frozen in. Like you can see, this bearing is pretty rusty. But if you're able to get them off, all it is like an ABS sensor protector ring. Unfortunately, you have to remove them to press the ball joint out, because it does kind of overlap here, and it will kind of block the ball joint halfway. In this scenario, this car doesn't have it, but if you see something that's like a stainless steel ring that's around here, it looks pretty massive, and you take it off and you can't put it back on. I mean, they put it on there for a reason, but I find that they always break. On this one in particular, it's had ball joints before. The previous mechanic took it off, must have damaged it, and never put it back on. Now, I mentioned this to the customer. Unfortunately, we don't have that part because it was never ordered, because I didn't know, and the customer opted to just let it ride the way it was. So before we go ahead and reassemble this, guys, now I know it's already reassembled because I'm filming this afterwards. The customer is on a deadline to get this car back. So up to the point where I replace the ball joint and press it in, I'll be showing you guys every step. When it comes time to reassembly, I'm going to have to speed it up a little bit, because I'm sure you don't want me to show you guys tightening up every single nut and bolt on here. So when it comes to reassembly, you'll see me physically explain what part is next, but I'm not going to be showing you guys me tightening it up or setting counter pins in there, just for the sake of time. So just wanted to throw that out there so none of you guys are disappointed. Now, before we put the knuckle on the car, this is what we're left with. What I'm going to try to do is go ahead and put our ball joint in the lower control arm, and also line up our axle at the same time. It may seem like it's difficult, guys, but it's really not. The main thing you got to be very careful with is not to break your ABS speed sensor wire while doing this. Now, I'm at the bench. I picked up our knuckle assembly. I'm gonna go ahead and slide the lower ball joint in. And when I get it on there just a little bit, I'm gonna go ahead and try to position my axle while lowering it in there. You can still position the axle afterwards, but it's just much easier when you have the access from your lower ball joint already removed on there. And then as soon as you do that, I always like to take my lower ball joint nut and go ahead and thread it in a couple turns on your ball joint, because you definitely don't want this to fall off and hurt someone, or worst case fall on you if it shifts. So I'm gonna go ahead and lock it down with that. Once I do that, I also like to take my axle nut and go ahead and spin it on a couple threads, just for, again, safety, helps keep it on there, so that way there's not a lot of movement. And then the next step, and I'm just gonna start off by hand threading these first, is I also like to take my upper control arm. Now this arm has leaked out a little bit of grease here, and we just did these upper control arms, but when you remove it and the boot is filled, a little bit of grease will come out where that stud shaft comes out. So we're just gonna go ahead and clean up any excess grease here. This is just how it goes with these. So now that we got the grease off there, I'm going to use my hand to basically push my upper control arm in, and I'm going to go ahead and get this started with a couple threads. So basically my knuckle assembly is held into place where it is right now. Now that I've went ahead and I put the bolts on my lower ball joint, on my axle, and my upper control arm, and again guys, I just ran them on there loosely, I haven't tightened them up yet. What I like to do next is take my ABS wire, and I like to feed it back in through the hole and make sure I clip it into place on the little connector where it goes through the body. And once I have that in place, I'm going to take my nuts and bolts for the rest of this and go ahead and start reattaching the wire. I try to do this in stages to where I just pre-assemble everything and get everything ready, and then I could just come in here and tighten everything up. Mainly because all of these bolts for the wiring are 10 millimeters, and then most of the bolts for the suspension components are all 17 millimeters. So it just makes more sense for me to go ahead and do it in one instead of messing around with it. And the other thing that we're also going to be bolting up is our brake hose here. We're going to take our holder and bolt that up to the knuckle as well, and hand thread the bolts on here. Again, just doing this because it's super convenient. If you want to do it step by step, if let's say you'll easily get confused on what bolts you didn't tighten, I would say maybe do it one by one and tighten each one as you move along. However, I've been doing this for many years, so I basically triple check and double check my work before I let it right out of here. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and tighten up my lower ball joint and set up my cotter pin in there. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up my upper control arm and set my cotter pin in there, and then we're going to go ahead and bolt up our tie rod to it. But I leave that towards the end because I do like having full access to this not being connected to the steering. So what I'm going to do off camera next is tighten up my lower ball joint and my upper control arm and get my cotter pin set. Now that I went ahead and I tightened up my lower ball joint, put my cotter pin in there, and my upper ball joint, and tightened up the cotter pin in there, guys, what we're going to do is take our caliper and remove our hook. I'm just going to kind of let it hang there on the stud. And we're going to go ahead and put it back as an assembly. Now, this is quite easy if your brake pads aren't falling out of it. So make sure that you make sure your brake pads are fully inserted in the notches, because when you remove them with the brackets, brake pads do have a tendency to kind of move out of their clip, and you might have an issue. So just make sure, double check all that. Now I'm going to go ahead and bolt this up and get this done. I'm also going to go ahead and tighten up all of my wiring and everything that bolts up to the knuckle that I left loose, and I'll be right back with you guys. Now that I bolted up my caliper and I got all of my lines and hoses all hooked up to my knuckle, I'm going to take my outer tie rod and I'm going to go ahead and put my bolt on, and we're going to go ahead and bolt that up. And then after we bolt this up, guys, what we're gonna do is go ahead and tighten up the axle nut and torque it. Now I will show you the axle nut, how I tend to torque it on there in this video so you can see that. Now everything is tightened up and we're gonna be tightening up our axle nut. The way I like to do this is take a flatbed screwdriver and you're gonna wanna stick it into the fins. Now sometimes there will be a cutout right here on the brake pad where you can get to the fin of the rotor. However, I'm just gonna stick it on the fin of the rotor and face it towards the bottom because we will be tightening going in this direction. Now you're gonna go ahead and get your torque wrench, and what I like to do is tighten this by hand up to the point where it's nice and snug. And the reason why you're installing this on there is so the rotor doesn't spin. You have something to lock onto. And I'm gonna go ahead and torque it on here. Now once I achieve my torque, I hold it on there and I'm just gonna double check it. And we are good to go. Now if I didn't have my screwdriver on there and I put my wrench on there, guys, you will notice that it just free spins. Alright guys, sorry in the last clip towards the end there, my phone started ringing, but now that you tightened it up, on most Hondas you have this little cutout where you're supposed to basically bend the axle nut inward. You can use a chisel and a hammer to do this. I'm just going to use my air hammer because it's handy, so I'm just going to line it up and push that inward like that. It's kind of a locker to help keep the nut from spinning out in case. And once you tighten up your axle nut and everything is torqued down, guys, all you're gonna do is put the wheel on, and that's how you basically do a lower ball joint on a Honda Accord and a lot of other Honda models. So that's how you do a lower ball joint on a Honda Accord, guys. It's quite simple and easy, and this applies to Civics, Accords, and many other Honda models that use a lower ball joint. That's exactly the setup. They're all virtually the same. This car was missing that little clip or stainless steel ring, whatever you want to call it, guys. So unfortunately you guys didn't get to see that portion of it because it wasn't there for me to remove, but it's quite easy to remove that portion. It's quick, painless, and easy. It does take a little bit of time. The hardest part is pressing the ball joint out and getting everything to separate. But aside from that, it's a pretty straightforward job. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully this video helps you guys out. Please comment, like, and subscribe. It definitely helps the channel grow. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Until then, I'll catch you guys on the next repair.